Okay, well, we'll kick off. I guess we'll have more people join as we carry on. But firstly, welcome to this webinar on early stage investing in climate tech. Obviously, this is time to coincide with COP26. It's a moment of global importance, and it's time, I think, for us to take stock of the early stage investing scene and innovation scene as we see it, and what the challenges are going forward, and where we think it will go from here. I'm joined today by four absolutely fantastic panelists. So we have with us today, we have Nick from UCLB, who works to help UCL commercialize all of its great inventions and ideas. He also runs a blog called Intercalation Station, all about batteries, and is a bit of a battery celebrity. So a great, well connected across the ecosystem, and as is Aidan, absolutely everything going on in that space. We have Dennis from BGF. Dennis has been an investor for over 20 years, a lot of that time investing in climate tech, early stage and growth stage, and has an incredible view on how the state of the investing scene at early stages has developed over the last 20 years, and I'm sure has some great thoughts on where it's going. We also have two entrepreneurs here from both within the UCL Tech Fund portfolio. Firstly, we have Vidal, who is COO at Bramble Energy, a fuel cell business spun out of UCL 2016, 2017, is that right, Vidal? Yeah. And we also have one of the newest entrepreneurs to join the UCL Tech Fund family as well. We have the CTO of Carbon Re, Aidan O'Sullivan, who is a deep reinforcement learning expert from UCL and is helping power a new startup to optimize the cement manufacturing process and other heavy industrial process industries such as steel and ceramics. So thanks first everyone for joining me. It's brilliant to have you all here. I'm going to kick off by just talking about sort of the historical context of climate tech investing and where we think it's going. Dennis, I'm going to point this question squarely at you, given you probably have the longest experience of the industry of anyone here. So this year is a really exciting year. $40 billion expected to be invested in climate tech, private climate tech companies this year, which is the most ever. All very exciting, but it wasn't so long ago that we had a boom in climate tech investing and then a big bust in 2011. I think we all think it's different this time. Do you? And if so, why? And what are the factors that are going to make it different?
Okay, I think it's a good question, and I think I firmly come down on the side that I think it is different. I lived through the last sort of climate tech boom and bust. I guess it kicked off around a little bit 2004, but maybe 2005, 6, and then, as you say, sort of came off 2011, 2012, depending on whose numbers you read. It's $20-odd billion went in, and less than half of that came out and left people somewhat jaundiced. But I think it is different now, and I think it's different now for three main reasons, and then a few things inside each of those. I think the first one is the reality of climate change. I think the reality of climate change is well accepted now. I think it's well accepted across the population. It's well accepted politically, and it's well accepted politically because there is strong popular support for doing things about it. And so we've got governments, we've got corporates, we've got investors, all setting net zero targets, all committing to decarbonize themselves, their supply chain, in a much more broad manner than ever existed 10 or 15 years ago. So I think the reality is important. If you think back, I guess I can easily, given my age, if you think back, 2006 was when An Inconvenient Truth came out. So the Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, came out in 2006, won an Oscar for Best Documentary in 2007. And the title is right, it was somewhat of an inconvenience. Climate change was an inconvenience. It was an inconvenience to the entire fossil fuel industry. And I would say a subset of the population bought into it, understood it, believed in it, and an awful lot of people were very happy ignoring it and actually not necessarily believing in it. I think one thing that's become clear since then is we're all witnessing the effects of it, depending on where we live and often when you turn on the news. the number of weather events in the US, say, going back 15 years, there might be 5 extreme weather events that would cause multi-billion-dollar losses in a year. It averaged 5 for decades. Over the last 10 years, it's more like 10 to 15. Last year, it was 22. Of the last 10 years, 6 of them are the warmest on record. It's clearly things are happening with the climate, and the effect is costing billions, if not tens of billions. So I think there is the reality piece, I'd say, is baked now. So that's not, I think, going to change. And it was only a subset of people last time, and definitely wasn't baked in. The second of my 3 things would be the economics. One of the things that helped the last clean tech boom was there were 2 major energy bills in the US. So they passed into the law in the US 2005, I think it was, in 2007. It was 5 and 6 or 5 and 7. And they gave significant tax breaks for renewable energy, gave some subsidies as well. So that gave a bit of a boost to the renewables industry, but it needed the tax breaks and it needed the subsidies because it was fundamentally uneconomic. So if you go back, depending on where you were in the world, about 12 years ago, producing energy through solar was 5 times as expensive as coal, and 5 times as expensive as coal, 4 times as expensive as gas, or the other way around, depending on where you were in the world, but 4 or 5 times the cost of fossil fuels. So you need the big subsidies. You're incredibly reliant on those subsidies. If they disappear, it's just not economic. That's very different now. And so on a levelized basis, I'm not sure that's the right way of looking at it for me personally, but on a levelized basis, solar, wind, cheaper than fossil fuel. Cheaper than gas, given what's happened with gas prices, but even cheaper if you take gas prices as they were earlier this year. So fundamentally, the economics are in a much better place. There's more renewable around. If you're talking about electric cars 15 years ago, when you're getting 10% of your electricity from renewable sources, it's not particularly green. If in Europe, certain countries, you're getting well over 50, 60, 70, that is much more green. It makes a lot of sense. Legislation, I think, is quite fundamental and supportive, certainly when it comes to electric cars, in that there has been subsidies around for a while, but the single biggest thing that moves the industry is, certainly in Europe, you won't be able to sell an pure ICE engine car within not that many years. You won't be able to sell one, so there's no point in investing in them. So we're seeing big shifts there, and we're seeing increasing consumer demand, consumer pull. So consumers are voting with their wallets. So fundamentally, on the economics of it, there is a lot of the renewable energies make sense economically. People are prepared to pay, and legislation is broadly supportive and will be even more supportive if carbon taxes get sorted out. And then my third thing is, I think the opportunity set is different. And so much of what we were investing in 12, 10, 15 years ago was, at the end of the day, it was solar and batteries. An awful lot went into solar, a lot went into batteries. Batteries were, again, uneconomic at that point in time. They're getting more economic now. In a few years' time, $100 a kilowatt hour will be a very nice price point. But it was mostly solar. It was mostly batteries, and a lot of the solar was really a manufacturing challenge that disappeared to China. That was ultimately what created the last clean tech boom. Was solar was the large part of it. That went to China. Everything else kind of fell flat. Right now, the opportunity set, I think, is much broader. People talk these days of climate tech as opposed to clean tech. They talk of the 5 big areas that generate most of the emissions, and so energy generation, as you'd expect, transport, agriculture, buildings, industry, and we're seeing startups across all of those areas. We've invested in a bunch in the fund, but I think everyone's seeing innovation in so many different places, focused on all the different ways that CO2 and greenhouse gases get released. And then I think the other big difference is we're seeing businesses that are fundamentally more scalable. And I think that was the thing that threw a significant part of the VC community last time around, is they were used to more scalable businesses. They were used to some of the e-commerce businesses and some of the social media businesses. And then you have a business which is fundamental manufacturing and it's fitting into someone else's supply chain. It's very different. It's very capital intensive. It's not particularly scalable. Right now, I think we're seeing some businesses like that, but we're also seeing a lot of businesses where software is involved. So we're seeing an awful lot of data-driven businesses, software-driven businesses, businesses that combine hardware and software, and they are just fundamentally more scalable, which is good because they'll provide solutions to the problems faster. People will start to see returns faster. It'll be more of a virtuous circle for the investment community. Because one thing we don't want is it to fall flat as it did last time. It needs to be a virtuous cycle that goes on and on for decades now, if there is a hope of solving the problems and limiting global warming. So for me, I think very, 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 very different. And I think quite exciting. I think it's an exciting sector in which it should genuinely be possible to both do good and make money.
Amazing. We have a couple of entrepreneurs on the call who are both either in the middle of raising money or having just raised money. How does that sort of description of it not being a subset of people where everyone sort of believing and wanting to get on board and invest in climate tech, how does that feel to you, having either just raised, Aidan, or in the middle of a raise, Vidal? How does that feel real to you?
Well, for us, we've got the appetite is incredible. The number of phone calls we're on, the number of mandates that funds have to look at decarbonising, and also some of the interesting routes that they're looking at decarbonisation. For example, we've got some funds that are looking to invest in companies such as Bramble to then decarbonise their fleet by rolling it through their other portfolio companies. So they're not looking at it just from a financial investment into Bramble and see what happens with Bramble, but actually for us to try and then take on some of their existing clientele and try and help them decarbonize, to then decarbonize their entire portfolio. So there's lots of new things that we're seeing this year that we didn't see last year. And I think that as you say, that's a really interesting change from us.
Yeah, just echo the same thing. And it's not just funds looking to add to their portfolio, which I guess is very much the case and is definitely a good thing in terms of diversifying exposure and things like this. So, but also the case that you do get interest from companies who are looking at, how do they decarbonize their own business, and then a startup in that space with technology becomes attractive as an investment opportunity for that purpose as much as for the returns.
I think one thing to comment on as well is where the money comes from. And what I mean by that is like, who are the LPs behind all these funds? And so, in the last 5 years or so, I think we've seen a lot more. When I think about LPs, I think about like high net worth individuals and banks and pension funds and things like that. But in the last couple of years, I think there's a lot more flavor of types of LPs. Like there's a lot of high net worth individuals who are celebrities who are really wanting to get into climate tech. There's a lot of people from the crypto boom who they suddenly have a lot of money, and they're Gen Zers and they really want to put their money back to something, not just to make money, but to like make a lot of different financial impact as well. So like we saw Robert Downey Jr. start his Footprint Coalition Fund. We saw like Jason Jacobs who founded Runkeeper, which is like a totally unrelated field, and then now he runs like a fund and a podcast called My Climate Journey, which is amazing. So there's a lot of new different types of LPs out there who are ready to deploy their capital as well.
If I could add to that, sorry, Dave, I know you're just about to speak. We're also seeing though that some of the larger institutional, slower moving funds are also looking to do decarbonisation work, right? It's not just not the new guys on the block. It's also, it's sort of the dinosaurs are now looking to decarbonise as well, and they're actively pushing for that. Some of the names on our tracker for our investment round that we're currently raising are names we were not expecting to see, and they've got real plans for decarbonisation and green investment, which is great to see.
Yeah, I was going to just echo Nick's point actually. So we have an LP of our own who has a climate tech initiative going on, and is therefore encouraging us to look at climate tech and helping us with our climate tech businesses, connect those businesses to other parts of their LP investing portfolio. So yeah, we certainly see it as a fund. I guess BGF, you maybe too. You see, LPs as well wanting to put their money in and money be used for investments that help the planet. So yeah, definitely,
absolutely.
Someone just asked what an LP is. That is an investor in an institutional fund. So a manager of a fund is a GP, and an investor in a fund who then invests in other things is an LP. But yeah, so a strong dynamic all the way through the kind of financial chain, from right at the top through the funds and to the businesses themselves. So changing tack ever so slightly, and just a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, please use the Q&A facility at the bottom. What role do startups have in creating the transition to net zero, as opposed to say sort of established businesses? And this question is firstly to you, Vidal. Primarily, you're a business making fuel cells. There are lots of kind of established businesses that sort of play in this space and dabble in, they've dabbled in ICE technology and they've dabbled in fuel cell technology. Why would a startup like Bramble bring something to the table that Bosch couldn't do themselves, for instance?
Yeah, really good question. I'll talk about this as a wider thing rather than just in fuel cells and hydrogen, but I will try and bring it back because it's where my expertise lies. So please excuse that these references. But for us at Bramble, we can move incredibly quickly, right? We can see opportunity and go for those opportunities much more quickly than the likes of the big OEMs and the tier ones and the incumbent manufacturers. With the way that we've made our fuel cells, and this is what I mean by my industry and this is my take on this, is that we've completely revolutionized how we make fuel cells. So everybody else who makes fuel cells, they have an inherent process that takes a very long time to make a fuel cell, and you have to build a factory that costs a certain amount of money. And at the end of that process, you have something that comes out, a fuel cell of certain size, certain dimensions, certain power output, et cetera, et cetera. For us, the way that we've approached this problem of and the problem I should have addressed at the top is, how do you make fuel cells cost effective and actually integratable and not niche application for, just the supercar, the one-off or the two-off? How do you actually get every vehicle that drives down the road how do you decarbonize those sectors in haulage and transportation, etc., is by making it cost effective. And Bramble's way of manufacturing that is to look at a completely novel manufacturing route that whips the cost out of that manufacturing process. It simplifies it completely. But when you've got inherent investment into these lines and factories that these incumbent manufacturers have, there is a massive inertia to go, I tell you what we should do is scrap that and do something else. And let's go down a different route, because you've got sunk capital in there. And I think that that's probably the real reason why the startup who can move very quickly, who have almost a blank piece of paper in front of them to how to solve a problem, versus here is a stack of papers next to you, and this is how we've attempted to solve these problems. Which way should we go back down? Because it's unlikely that you're just going to throw the papers off the desk and start again because of your inherent investment. And for us, we can listen to a customer and respond to their needs very quickly. Whereas, the decision makers that are at Bramble, at least, and then I know in most startups, the people having those initial conversations in the commercial side are one step removed from the decision makers at the maximum. Whereas often if you're at Bosch or whatnot, and I go to you and say, can you make me a fuel cell for my marine application? There's so many layers of chains and things that you have to get through, whereas we can move really quickly. And that means that we can sort of look to decarbonize more quickly, get a product into the market more quickly. And I think that that's the real benefit of being in a startup.
Yeah, Aidan, I guess you're finding that too at Carbon Re.
Yeah, I think the points Vidal has raised are really, really accurate and really true to the situation. But I would also add that focus is really critical as well. And the focus that we have at Carbon Re is different to the incumbents in the industry. They're focused on producing as much of the product as they can, whereas we're much more focused on what's the way of reducing costs and thereby carbon emissions in the production of this product, which everyone needs, and is definitely something, going forward, the demand for these products is going to be increasing, not diminishing. So we have to figure out ways of doing this in a sustainable way that will reduce emissions from the sector while still enabling, society to function. But in terms of what you can kind of bring to the table as a startup, and the space definitely needs more startups, and I would encourage more people to look at this route as a vehicle to accelerate decarbonization, and it's definitely what the area needs. Again, it's the focus, and that people are coming along with the vision of building a company to achieve something, and to achieve something in an industry that it might not have been on the table. It might be a different way of looking at things, but it drives the industry in a direction that we need to go in order to prevent climate change and to mitigate the effects.
Sorry, Dennis, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the startups have a role to play in innovation. I think is a generic question. Has been asked for decades. It has proved true for decades, really. I mean, all the US startups that started in people's garages, all the various companies. I mean, possibly every company I've ever invested in. I think you could ask the question of why didn't some incumbents start that And so I don't think it's unique to climate tech. I think entrepreneurship, as we've seen, and I think as we're seeing increasing amounts of capital get deployed into startup businesses across a range of sectors, and I think it is because they're highly focused on providing a solution to a very specific problem, which is quite different if you're a large organization and you're trying to run your business and you've got multiple stakeholders, you've got multiple things to think about, you've got existing employees, all sorts of things. I think structurally, as we've seen in the pharma industry, the medtech industry, generally in the tech industry, don't necessarily support innovation. Large corporates often end up creating some internal skunk works, almost like an internal startup. If they've got a particularly hard problem to resolve, they go through periods of having their own venture fund and having it in-house and spinning it out. Innovation is a struggle for large corporates. They do it. Many of them do it well, but there's, I think, an enormous role to be played for startup businesses, and ultimately they'll grow up, they'll solve a problem. At some point, they'll either go public or they'll get acquired. And a lot of innovation for corporates is done through acquisition these days. So it needs the funnel of startups, as Aidan says. I think there needs to be more and more startups. There's plenty of problems to be solved. We're keen to support it, and then hopefully the innovation grows.
If we look at some of the LPs that support a lot of the VCs, and you can see that there is desire for big corporates, tier ones, OEMs to be funding innovation in a different way. They're not, when we talk about corporates being giants and being slow moving, I think that's almost a little unfair, because what you do have is the ability, and I think you're seeing it more and more now, is that you're getting these startups that, like the likes of Bramble, that can partner with large OEMs and tier ones, the likes of Bosch, etc., aren't necessarily looking at fuel cells and going, right, should we reinvent fuel cells? They're looking at who's got massive focus on big investment, on big inventorship changes, who's innovating really quickly and really well, and then looking to partner with those companies so that you can then use their might to bring your product to market. And I think that's a really important thing. Really important to have lots of entrepreneurs and innovative technology. But how do you get that from your garage to someone's boat is a really interesting path. And I think that those larger companies are a really good vessel to get you there.
Yeah, excellent. And the focus on kind of having a really sort of exciting technological innovation sort of brings us a little bit back to the university scene. Nick, you're involved in helping a lot of the academics and a lot of the sort of research. It's really sort of at the fundamental level, exciting level within UCL to get out there. What are universities doing to support climate tech businesses and be part of the solution here?
Thanks, Dave. I have a lot of things to say about this topic, but when I think about it, I take a step back. I think about what universities were set up to do, a couple hundred years ago, and the role was always the pursuit of knowledge, just pure academia, pure research. And now I think in the last 1 or 2 decades, it's a little bit different. Now it's like you have this new priority that's just come out, and it's to create impact, both like commercial impact and societal impact. So it's like you think about it, and how can a university change from university 1.0 to 2.0 so that you can offer both of these arms of the university in a way that helps support people who want to do pure knowledge and pure academia, but also people who want to go off and kind of try doing their own thing. And so, one thing I've seen a lot at UCL is that we're trying very hard to do a lot of commercial support and commercial training from academics leaders. We've seen like the incredible brain power at UCL from everyone from students to the academics to professors, and sometimes though they have no idea how to take an idea from idea to an opportunity. And so that kind of commercial training, just to open their eyes to a real world kind of how to get something to the real world is incredibly valuable. And it's just like different ways that you can make a university kind of like a pre-accelerator program almost. And so that's something that we've done quite a lot with the UCL Computer Science Department as well. We've been piloting programs just as a way for us to understand how, like what academics need, what they're thinking about, what kind of ideas they have, but also providing them training so that they have the skills and tools if they wanted to take something forward from their research. Another thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the early stage funding scene. And I've seen a lot of universities partnering with venture arms, which is incredible. So the one that, from this call, it's like we have UCL and UCL Tech Fund that's designed specifically to invest in UCL spinouts, and we have like Carbon Re and Bramble and Eurotempest, just like incredible UCL spinouts that were supported by UCL Tech Fund. And we're seeing this model pop up in other universities as well. There's like a bunch in Oxford, there's a bunch in Cambridge. MIT just came out with the engine sometime this year, as well as like a lot of non-university specific arms. So like Activate Fellowship Program is one in the US. Breakthrough Energy Venture Fellows, which is like funded by Bill Gates. That's like a 2-year program. It's just purely for academics and PhD students to support and like build their product for 2 years, which is incredible. So a lot of these like universities partnering with venture arms is a really, really successful model moving forward, I think. Spreading awareness is also very important. And one thing that UCL is really working on and leading is the Generation 1 campaign. So this is a movement led by UCL to help spread awareness that we are the generation to start making a change with the climate problem. The program and movement was inspired by one of former President Barack Obama's quotes, and he said, "We're the first generation to feel the effect of climate change. We are the last one who can do something about it." And so there's a whole lot of activities and events that UCL is hosting for this, a lot of workshops, a lot of guest speakers, open to public, as well as online on the Generation 1 website. And it's just really important I really resonate with Generation 1 because like I do think we are the generation, the people in this call are the people who are going to help take this forward. And I say that because I think that there's a majority of people in power today in the corporate world, but also like in the policy world who just don't care enough. A lot of people are happy to stick to status quo. A lot of people are happy to set goals, couple 3-4 decades in the future, which I think is not okay. Climate problem is something that's happening this decade and needs to be solved now. And so Generation 1 is something that I really support UCL in doing. So those are a couple of ways that universities are working on the climate problem and kind of the entrepreneurial acceleration. But I mean, if you're in an environment where you don't have access to like climate education, or maybe you're in a research project that isn't related to climate, there are so many non-university programs too that are so amazing. And it's just a way to create like a lot of accessibility for anyone to get into climate. So there's a lot of like online programs like the On Deck program, the Terra.do program, Work on Climate, Climate Tech VC, My Climate Journey. They're all like amazing resources for anyone kind of to get embedded into the climate ecosystem. So I recommend those as well.
Amazing. Dennis, as someone who's not like directly linked to a university, how do you see it from slightly sort of removed? How do you see the universities operating with venture?
I think increasingly well, I guess. I think an awful lot better these days than certainly 20 years ago and even 10 years ago. So I think there has been that change, as Nicholas said, over the last couple of decades. And I mean, it feels to me certainly in the UK, I think a number of UK universities seems to go from strength to strength. The quality of the support which is set up. I mean, it's really is the point one of the points Nicholas was making. The quality of the support around a number of universities is superb and just getting better. I think the quality of startups, honestly, is a lot better. I think it's better now than it was, definitely better now than it was 10 years ago. And it feels like there's, I think, an incredibly important role for universities to play. And I think perhaps climate tech is it's a broad area, but perhaps it's a broad area which really plays to a number of universities' strengths. A lot of the solutions to these problems do need to be quite deep science, and I think a lot of that will come out of research labs and the sort of brains and research activities of the incredibly smart people in the various universities. So I think important role to play. It feels like it's certainly from sort of one step removed. Quality is improving, desire is improving, and I think a great interest in being involved in providing solutions to some of the climate tech problems. So yeah, I mean, I'd hope that we'd see. I think we'll see a number of success stories coming out of universities, and success tends to beget success. So hopefully we're kind of at the start of the early stages of what hopefully will be a virtuous circle.
And entrepreneurs on the call, like you're both from within university departments, this is where you started your sort of climate tech journey. How does that feel to you? Does the universities feel like a good place to be launching from?
Yeah, I think it's now the case. Maybe it was the case previously that you had an either or decision. You either were an academic or you were an entrepreneur. And I think the big shift has been, universities enabling you to continue on in your academic role and support the endeavor of, taking that research and turning it into actual applications. And in terms of impact, that's what academia is starting to measure more, and it's less about kind of just continuing on the role and doing kind of the day-to-day, but now they're more championing kind of exceptional applications of research and how those are turned into real world impact. So I think that's definitely a positive in terms of the ecosystem and something that's changed within academia as kind of an academic. That's definitely a big shift I've seen, that it's much more acceptable to be kind of playing in both worlds.
For me, I think Bramble wouldn't exist if we didn't come out of university. The access to the information as to, first of all, how you run a business and the advice and the connections you get, but also the ability to do the technology development, right? You don't typically have the sort of lab facilities in your garage that you might have in a technology lab at UCL or Imperial or wherever it may be. And I think that the university, it's difficult to speak on anything prior to the experience that I've had, of course, but having the university experience to get us from concept through to product development and commercialization and into fully fledged business, it just wouldn't happen without that springboard. So I think it's critically important, especially for really deep tech work. I think that if you're programming something or you do lines of code, absolutely makes sense. But when you're doing something that requires equipment and technology development, you require the universities.
And Aidan, you've just sort of made the transition between being a full-time academic and moving into entrepreneurship. What's that been like? What have the challenges been? What's sort of driven you to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I could definitely talk quite a bit on this. I'm kind of a bit of an innovation geek in terms of historical kind of transitions in innovation, things like the Skunkworks lab coming out of Lockheed Martin and Xerox and Park, and how you get the kind of right environment for innovation and research to take place. In terms of kind of the academic to entrepreneurship, I think it's becoming a lot more viable. I think it's the right conditions are present in university. You're given time to think and time to develop ideas. And then it's kind of how do you translate those into actual application and into impact. And I guess the challenges moving from academia are, typically you're working in quite a siloed environment. You work with your PhD students as an academic, you work with your postdocs, and you're all very much working in the same direction. You have a kind of a shared language and a shared understanding, and it makes, that you develop through collaboration and through having, niche expertise in a field. And when you move into kind of early stage entrepreneurship, you have to, be working with people with a diverse array of skills, and you all have to be aligned on the same vision. So again, communicating and taking things forward there is really important. I guess in terms of kind of the similarities between entrepreneurship and academia, what you generally find is people are advocates for their field in academia. Everyone thinks the project they're working on is the most interesting and most important project that could ever be. And if you meet them at a dinner party, that's what they'll want to talk to you about. So that's pretty good for an entrepreneur. That makes a good kind of setup for someone who wants to, work on something, 24/7 and really push it forward and see the impact. It helps to have that passionate kind of interest in a problem. And, that definitely makes for a good entrepreneur, someone who cares a lot about it and is willing to put in, the amount of work. And generally academia gives you kind of that kind of training as well in kind of deep expertise in a field. People only kind of work on things that they're super interested in, and it is, how successful they are is down to them. So you get kind of this extreme ownership kind of idea where, you know, people take a lot of responsibility for their research, and that again translates well into setting up a startup. You know, it doesn't matter if it's your fault or not. If things fall apart, you know, the whole startup is sunk. So making sure everything, you know, and taking responsibility for things is a really good kind of a way to get experience of being an entrepreneur from academia, and, you know, sets you up well to transition, or so I hope.
Nick, you're involved in helping lots of academics do this at UCL, and Dennis, I'm sure you've invested in plenty of academics who've done it. Like, have you got any advice for any academics who might be watching this, thinking about doing something similar to Aidan? What should they be thinking about?
I think you should be talking to as many founders as you can. You just, you know, talk to as many academic founders as you can, see what was going through their minds, and, you know, why, I guess, why they decided to make the leap into entrepreneurship, and, you know, just ask them as much as you can about it. I think that's one of the best ways to learn. And I mean, you know, there's a million reasons why you might want to start a company and why you might want to do something entrepreneurial. So just get out there and talk to as many people as you can. That would be my biggest and first advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think it's there's plenty of people to talk to. I'd get out there. I'd talk to people. I'd read some books. I mean, there's some interesting books that you can read on other entrepreneurial journeys that people have taken. And the one thing, I guess, that if there was a single specific piece of advice, having been on, I suppose, the receiving end or engaged in a number of conversations, the thing that I do find, and maybe it's just it could just be me, but a number of times people seem to overlook the size of the market for the problem they're solving, and so people can often go a long way down the line of got this fabulous technology, can solve this interesting problem. If the market for that is $10 million a year, you're going to struggle to get anything financed for it, and maybe you need to look for other applications for the technology if it's a significant problem with significant dollars around it. And so that's the one piece which seems to somehow sort of follow up if things are more technically focused is just the fundamental sort of problem solution and what size market is that applicable to. And so I'd encourage people to have the conversations, talk to other entrepreneurs, but actually think about, you know, overall, what does the market look like where they feel they might have a commercial product to enter, and is it genuinely big enough?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think once you start talking to people, you realize that everyone is really, really open and accepting, and especially if we're entrepreneurs from UCL, we're always very willing to give back and help the next generation of entrepreneurs. So if you have a question about like hydrogen, for example, I'm sure you can reach out to Vidal and so on. It's really the best way, because I found that, you know, you can learn, you can absorb their decades of information and training in just like an hour-long conversation. And so that's kind of, in terms of time, I think that's one of the most efficient ways to learn about a problem or a market or a technology idea that you might have, and also a great way to make connections as well.
To echo that, when we were spinning out Bramble and when we were moving out of the universities and so on, we read hundreds of books, right? And they're all great, but until you actually experience it, you don't know what you're in for. However, speaking to people who have experienced it, and I wish that I could have spoken to myself or to my co-founder Tom, you know, that many years ago, and get that information, even from silly things like, well, from everything from how to run the business to how you scale up the technology. There's a wealth of information that you garner from running the business. And I think that anyone who ever wants to reach out about talking about anything from hydrogen to running a business, please feel free to reach out to me.
It's a very, very lovely offer. So I'm sure lots of people will take you up on that, Vidal. Just a quick question we've had on the Q&A. So from Paul. So given huge pressure on costs, particularly as people look at how to adapt to climate change, where do we see the investment opportunities that are arising, given that big business, you know, has inertia and they have big pressure on costs? Where do we see the investment opportunities for climate tech and startups?
No, it's quite a broad question, isn't it? If you look at where most of the dollars have been invested so far, most of the dollars so far have been invested in technologies that enable support the decarbonisation of energy. They've been invested in stuff around electric transport, and they've been invested in artificial proteins or plant-based proteins. So, I mean, most of the money so far has gone into those sectors around renewables, battery storage, some things around the grid, a bit on the agriculture side, and I guess the investment community is guilty of kind of following the latest comp. And so Tesla sets up a great comp and is valued at 100 times revenues, and so you then think that anybody else doing an electric anything could be worth that. And Beyond Meat has a very high valuation, and maybe Ballard Power. So in each area, you do tend to get a bit of concentration, and that's certainly where the money's gone so far. And I think the opportunity set is quite broad, and I think the opportunity is probably best for those that are able to do, I think, one of three things. So either some behavioural change, because ultimately to get through this and to actually really make a significant difference, it requires behavioural change, consumers, people in business, or it requires a massive increase in efficiency. Efficiency is actually just making what you can, consuming less power, less resources, is a fabulous win versus trying to do the same in a decarbonised way. And then third, there is of course the sort of fundamental decarbonisation. So I think opportunities that successfully change behaviours, improve efficiencies, or decarbonise will always those kind of opportunities are strong opportunities, and then you can work out and sort of see the economics. Things that rely on subsidies, I think, don't necessarily have a long-term future. Perhaps that things that rely on a carbon tax, could do when that if that eventually gets sorted out. And I think the opportunity landscape is really broad. I think there's maybe more opportunity around some of the hard to abate stuff, because it is just harder problems to solve. And so I think a lot of the maybe the lower hanging fruit is where investors tend to focus first, and possibly some of the bigger wins will come in some of the hard to abate things. But you've got to have an appetite for perhaps some deeper tech, be a bit more patient with your capital, and be helpful when it comes to scaling those businesses.
Cool, excellent. Just focusing back on COP26. It's coming to a conclusion this week. What things are you hoping to see from COP26 that would make you positive about our future as a planet, keeping below 2 degrees warming as the aim, and the role of startups within that?
Well, I think I can say what I think. I think this goes to a point I think Nicholas made. I'd actually like to see some near-term commitments made and near-term things happening. I think it's incredibly good that people are setting 2050 targets. I think it wasn't so well received in certain areas of the press, but I think it was great that India set a 2070 target. Even if the 2070 is even better if the 2070 target is all greenhouse gases, because it's better to have some target than not. But actually, the most impressive thing coming out of India was the desire to have 500 gigawatts of renewables up and running by 2030. This would be installing as much renewable power as we have in the UK every single year from now until the end of the decade. That's something that's near term. It's potentially doable if you can actually get enough kit and solve some of the logistical issues. It's possible to get it financed, and it would see India go from what I think is sort of low double-digit share of renewables to potentially 50%. So things like that, which are actually more near-term commitments to actually spend money, install things, decarbonize, do something sort of practical and useful in the near term. I'd like to see more and more of that, and I'd like to see more of that coming out of the US and China. It's potentially unlikely with China, especially right now, but I'd like to see it. And I would like more to be done in the US. I think there's a lot is spoken about, but it's the CO2 output per capita in the US is almost twice what it is in Europe. It's a very, very energy hungry nation. And I personally would like to see more happen there soon.
I echo Dennis's points. Short-term or near-term goals are really important, but I'd also like to see near-term strategy. I think one of the things that we are quite good at doing is setting a goal and saying, oh, would it be great in 2050 to be net zero? How? And what is the strategy around the government funding to get there? What is the technologies that they're going to be backing? And what opportunities are there for startups and entrepreneurs to then start looking at attempting to attack those technological problems? I think strategy is really important rather than just a goal some distance in the future.
Nick or Aidan, do you have any hopes for the end of COP26?
Yeah. So actually, the commitments so far from COP26 get us to about 1.8 degrees Celsius, which is modeled. So it's the first time ever that we've been under 2 degrees Celsius, which is good news. But there's always more to do. I mean, the climate problem is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. And what I saw from COP26 were a lot of countries announcing their own goals. But, it was like 10 years ago when all the developed countries came together and said, we're gonna contribute 100 billion per year to support all these developing countries. And, 12 years later, we're still not able to match that promise. We're still only contributing about 80 billion. So it's like it took 12 years and we still aren't able to do something like that. So I would love to see some more near-term goals, some more accountability as well, some more tracking for these countries, but also a lot more cooperation between countries. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, because, a lot of people are not in the room that needs where the conversations happen. And it's because a lot of underrepresented populations, underrepresented countries just weren't at COP26, or they're not able to get into these climate conversations. So, getting the right people in those rooms on a government level, but also showing that through private investment into developing countries is what I'd like to see in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, less about the outcomes of COP, but I think just even the way people are thinking about COP and talking about it is positive in itself. And if it's even just a focal point, then it has kind of served some kind of beneficial purpose as well. So, I think it was said earlier on that, we're no longer having this debate about whether climate change is real or not. Now it's about what do we do about it, which is, a sense of progress in a way. And, the fact that, COP is an important date on the calendar, for 180 countries is really positive in a sense. In terms of what comes out of it, I think there'll be lots of grand proclamations, and I think that can be useful as in a sense of identifying some of the opportunities as well. So for technologists, once these kind of statements are made, it can draw attention and innovation into an area, and hopefully, get people excited about possibly, doing something to help decarbonize electricity, to help decarbonize transport. People are making these big proclamations at such a high level stage. Maybe that inspires undergraduates, postgraduates, with an interest in this area to start taking on that problem. And the more people we have working in the space, the better.
So one thing that excited me this week or last week was the UK government agreeing to make mandatory the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So for those who don't know, this is a task force that recommended that big business be forced to account for their climate impact and what they're doing about it. And that's now been made mandatory by UK Gov for our or UK-based companies going forward. How do you see that? That I think presents some exciting opportunities for startups. How do you see that impacting Bramble and Carbonary and the wider climate tech startup community?
I think it's invaluable. It's essentially an open playbook as to what sort of areas and opportunities you should be targeting. You're seeing the problem firsthand, and where these big entities, where the government is actually feeling the pain, and for nimble, agile startups who can address lots of different critical issues, it gives you an insight into what is the quickest route into solving big problems. And I think that is something that we've not seen that before, and I think that's going to present a lot of opportunities for a lot of entrepreneurs, personally.
Absolutely. I think accountability is, the piece of the puzzle that's been missing. climate change is a tragedy of the commons, where the goods are kind of used without any kind of accountability. So there have been some initiatives like this in the past, things like natural capital accounting to kind of take into account damage that happens to rivers by companies and make them pay for it. But this is really positive in terms of putting it on front and center on the agenda for lots of companies who might have been able to avoid it for a period of time. Climate change is definitely going to need a range of technologies, but one of the things you don't want is people to hide behind technology and say everything will be fine once we have carbon capture storage. This is kind of some of the solutions that you see, or some of the kind of strategies you see from companies who are major polluters and major emitters, and forcing them to account for this earlier and increasing financial penalties and things like this is a really positive step to make them consider what can they do in the short term to improve, and not just wait for a silver bullet in 10 years.
I think that's right. I think it's very good these shine a light, that the TCFD mandate shine a light on things, and so that the core things that are in there are you have to disclose your climate risk. So you have to look at what's the risks to your business, your infrastructure, your supply chain due to climate change. You've got to model that risk under typically four forward-looking scenarios, and you have to come up with a strategy as to how you're going to mitigate that climate risk. Maybe you've got parts of your supply chain which are going to be in areas of the world which by 2035 might be too hot for people to work. Maybe you've got part of your infrastructure which could flood. So it focuses people it focuses people's minds on what actually is the risk of not doing anything, and what is the risk under various scenarios for global warming. And then the other thing is you have to calculate and share your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so the emissions from exactly what you do, the emissions from your direct purchases of power, and then the emissions from your supply chain. And the supply chain is really not trivial. It's often 80% of a company's, 80% plus of a company's emissions. A lot of companies aren't even sure exactly what their supply chain looks like. So that's not a trivial thing to solve, and there are a bunch of startups already that'll help companies solve that problem. And all of this will, I think, shine a light on it. It's just premium listed UK businesses that'll have to report next year. By 2023, it's all UK listed businesses, as well as asset managers, people like ourselves, and then by 2023, potentially all businesses. When the G7 met in Cornwall, all the G7 said they were going to mandate it. So far, the UK is the first. All the G7 said they will, and I think it'll roll out to most countries. And I think it's good to have a common framework. There are a lot of frameworks right now in this world and around this area, and a common framework is good. And hopefully, this will shine a light on it. And as people get measured, they'll then need to come up with strategies as to how to mitigate and improve. And hopefully this will improve kind of the near term, as every year companies will have to understand where their emissions are and actually start crafting and sharing a strategy for how to decarbonize.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was mentioned. I think it really highlights, the fact that we need this highlights the main disease in our system of life that we've kind of grown up in and we've grown up in. It's like the most important thing for a company is profit. That's the bottom line, and no mention of carbon for the last however many years. And now all of a sudden it's like, yes, we're tracking carbon now. We want it to be a priority for companies equal to profit. So I think it's a good step. It really highlights the public companies, but also will kind of simmer over to the private sector as well. And it's important because you can't improve what you don't measure. So this is a good step for public companies to just start measuring what they do and think about how they can improve.
Yeah, it strikes me, if you're in the business of helping goods vehicles decarbonize and move things around without generating carbon, or if you're in the business of getting basic manufacturing blocks like cement done with less carbon, then you're hopefully going to be providing a solution to lots of businesses who need to be saying in their scope 3 emissions, my supply chain is decarbonizing. You should be able to exploit that enormously over the next few years.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's hope so.
We've got 2-3 minutes left. Please, if you want a quick last question, please do use the Q&A. I'll just shoot around the panelists. Given what you see you all have a very good view across what's happening in early stage technology innovation to kind of help tackle the climate crisis. Should people watching this be optimistic?
Yes, we have a long way to go, but the investment horizon's looking much better and stronger for clean tech technologies, and the technologies that are actually being invested in, we're going to make a difference, right? And certainly with what we're seeing at COP26, what we're seeing with these new mandates, if people have to open their books and show where their carbon footprint lays, we can start. Some of our startups can start to attack those problems and get ahead of the curve. But we need more entrepreneurs, so sign up and do some really interesting stuff, guys.
I think the fact that this is happening, we're having this conversation, is good. I think there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic. I think we need to be both optimistic and urgent. This isn't a problem that we're going to solve in 1, 2, 3 decades. It's a problem that needs solving starting now. So I think plenty of reasons to be optimistic, plenty of reasons, though, to demand more urgent action.
Yeah, I would definitely be on the optimistic side, and I think it's a huge opportunity, not just to do something in climate, but also for you to kind of build something with a purpose and with a mission-driven kind of startup looking to do good in the world, and that kind of opportunity to work on something that you care about, that's beneficial to the entire world population. It's not immediately obvious where you would do that in a normal company. So the idea that there is investment available for this area is a huge opportunity for people to start working on things that they care about, and that gives them a sense of purpose to get up and do your day job on a regular basis.
Yeah, there's literally no better time in history to start a climate tech startup than 2021 or 2022. So if you have if you have an idea and you want to work on it, I highly recommend you just try it. And I think that we need so many more climate tech startups to help take out this carbon from the air. And I was reading Larry Fink's opinion piece, the CEO of BlackRock, and he thinks that the next 1,000 unicorns are going to be climate tech focused. So that's a really good signal for the industry. Like, there's a lot of impact to be made. There's a lot of money to be made. So yeah, great time for everyone. Great.
Well, that's a very positive note to finish on. Thank you, Nick, Vidal, Dennis, Aidan, for joining me today. It's really appreciated. It's great to be working with you in all the various capacities that I do. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Look forward to hosting more webinars on how great climate tech is doing in 2022 and 2023.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Good, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.